Welcome back to our course, Introduction to Complex and Algebraic Geometry. Before we dive in and continue our discussion, let me say a few words about the title of our course, which is formed by two subjects, algebraic geometry and complex geometry. These are two very closely related subjects, but they're not exactly the same. So let me say a few words about what each of them is really about. In algebraic geometry, as the name suggests, we study the connections between algebra and geometry. On the algebra side, we have polynomials in one or several variables and more abstract algebraic objects associated with these polynomials. Say, for instance, x squared plus y squared equals to 1, right? This is a simple polynomial. On the geometry side, we look at the solutions to these polynomial equations, the shapes cut out by the zero set of these polynomials in spaces like Rn or Cn. So for instance, for this x squared plus y squared equals 1, the shape cut out, if we assume x and y are two real variables, would be just a circle in R2. So in general, these objects are called algebraic varieties, or more generally, schemes. They locally look like solutions to a set of polynomial equations, but globally they are very rich and complicated geometric objects. Right. So here I mentioned x and y being in R, but we usually work over algebraically closed fields like C, and the objects in higher dimensions can be quite complicated. So on the other side, we have complex geometry. Complex geometry, on the other hand, studies and works with holomorphic functions rather than just polynomials between spaces like Cn and Cm. It studies spaces called complex manifolds, geometric objects that locally look like Cn. For example, this sphere, only the boundary, not the thing inside, which, well, this is like a two-dimensional sphere, real dimension to complex dimension one. But globally, they can also be very different from Cn. They can be quite complicated. These spaces are at the heart of complex geometry, or more generally, geometry from the time of Riemann, maybe up to today. They're very important in various theories in physics too. So we have these two fields, algebraic geometry and complex geometry. Although they are somewhat different and independent fields, they're very close to each other. They share many ideas. So maybe it would be best to learn them in parallel at the same time, especially if you are geometry minded. In particular, in this course, we do algebraic geometry over C, so it's very close to complex geometry, right? So what is the best way to learn them? There are a few very good books on these subjects. So in algebraic geometry, there is Hartshorne's book, Algebraic Geometry, which is a standard reference based on so-called scheme theoretic approach. It's a great book with lots of examples. However, it's a bit dense and can be challenging as the only reference. So it's better to couple it with a more beginner-friendly book, the book by Robbie Vakil called The Rising Sea. So it kind of covers a lot of the same ground, but it has a slightly different style. It's a bit more modern, has more details, has more example. It's a bit more conversational, maybe slightly easier to read. However, sometimes it might feel a bit too long. So it's not maybe a book to read cover to cover, at least at the first try, but it can accompany Hartshorne's book. And on the complex geometry side, we have a very good book by Griffiths and Harris called The Principles of Algebraic Geometry. It treats algebraic varieties or smooth algebraic varieties as complex manifolds. So it has a bit more differential geometric approach, complex geometric approach. It is very good for people who are more interested in connections to differential geometry as well. And it can be kind of a good accompany book to the two previous ones to learn more Hodge theoretic sides, connections to Durham theory and things like that. So going back to algebraic geometry, as I mentioned, we study connections between algebra and geometry. And as I said, on the algebra side, we have polynomial equations. On the geometry side, we have the solutions to these equations called algebraic varieties. Let's look at a few simple examples. So for simplicity here, I would just consider polynomials in two variables over R. In general, as I said, we usually don't do that. But let's just look at a few examples. So the polynomial equation x squared plus y squared minus 1 equals 0. So we know the geometric object associated to this is just a circle, which is a smooth object. But what if I consider y squared minus x squared equals 0? Then the algebraic variety I would get in R2 would be just the union of two lines intersecting at the origin. So at the origin, it kind of has a self-intersection. It's not in some sense smooth. And it is related to the fact that y squared minus x squared can be decomposed into product of two polynomials, y minus x and y plus x, right? So this algebraic variety can be written as union of two other algebraic varieties. It's called reducible. It's our first example of seeing something reducible. Now let's look at this other polynomial equation, y squared minus x squared times x plus 1 equals 0. If we look at the algebraic variety associated to this, we see a figure like this one. Again, it has a self-intersection. It doesn't look like to be reducible. It doesn't seem to be union of two things. However, if we just look at the origin, on the neighborhood of the origin, if we zoom in, again, we see two lines intersecting at a point. So it's very similar to y squared minus x squared equals 0 picture. Why is that? So very close to the origin, x and y are small. So x plus 1 is very close to 1. Therefore, y squared minus x squared times x plus 1 is very close to y squared minus x squared. And we already saw the algebraic variety associated to that is just union of two lines. For the last example, let's look at this one, y squared minus x cubed equal to 0. So if we draw the figure algebraic variety in R2 associated to this, we see a figure like this. Again, look at the origin. There's a broken point. It's an example of a singularity. In particular, it's called a cusp singularity. So here, our polynomial equation doesn't give us something smooth. Doesn't have self-intersection, but it has a singularity. So just in a few examples, we saw a polynomial can give us something smooth, can give us something which has self-intersection, it can give us something which has singularities, and that's kind of the point. We like to see that, how the algebraic information characterize the geometric ones. So now we are focused more on C rather than R, especially because it's an algebraically closed field, meaning every non-constant polynomial equation in one variable, say PC equals 0, has a solution there. However, in algebraic geometry, we don't just study polynomials, we study system of polynomial equations. So for example, let's say P1, P2 up to Pm are m polynomials in n complex variables, z1 up to zn. Can we say this system always has a solution? For instance, let's look at the example, z1 squared plus z2 squared minus 2 equals 0, z1, z2 minus 1 equals 0. This is an example of a system of two polynomials in two complex variables, z1 and z2. So we like to know if we can say something about these system of polynomial equations having solutions or not, right? So look at this for a second. Can you solve this example? That's the main question. Now, the point is that unlike just one single polynomial, if you're working with a system of polynomials, it doesn't have a solution, even in simplest cases. Look at P1 of z being z and P2 of z being z plus 1. Two polynomials in just one variable. Well, this system obviously doesn't have a solution. Since the first equation says z equals to 0, the second one says z equals to minus 1 over c. 0 and minus 1 are not the same. Therefore, this system doesn't have a solution. This leads to the natural question. What is the precise condition or theorem to tell us when a system of polynomials have a solution? This is the key result in this direction, Nullstellensatz theorem, which translates to, loosely speaking, zero locus theorem. The theorem tells us that over C, or in fact, over any algebraically closed field, only one of the following two things hold. So either a system of polynomials, say P1 up to Pm in Z1 to Zn has a solution. That's one possibility. The other one is that there are m polynomials, Q1 up to Qm, in the same variable Z1 to Zn, such that this combination, P1 Q1 plus up to Pm Qm is equal to 1. So the theorem says exactly one of these two things holds. It means they cannot be true at the same time, and it's not possible that neither is true. One of them must be true. So this is an important theorem. So if you think you need pause here, read it a bit more carefully, make sure you understand it. Let's get back to our example, our trivial example, P1 of z being z, P2 of z being z plus 1. So we know this system doesn't have a solution. So the theorem tells us that there should be Q1 and Q2 in one variable z so that P1 Q1 plus P2 Q2 equals 1. Can you find them? I mean, it's pretty simple. If I let Q1 to be just a constant polynomial minus 1 and Q2 to be 1, well, the product would be minus z plus 1, which is 1. Also note that the fact that C is an algebraically closed field is important here. The theorem is not correct over R. The statement does not hold over R, right? So for instance, consider the polynomial px equals x squared plus 1, right? Over R, this polynomial doesn't have a solution. This polynomial equation has no solution. However, there is also no polynomial qx such that px qx is equal to 1. So no solution, also no polynomial q, right? So this says the theorem, the statement does not hold over R. It's important that C is closed. Let's think about for a few moments about why the theorem is correct. I'm not going to prove it here, but it's still worth thinking about it. So if the system has a solution, there's a point z1 to zn in Cn, so that p1 at that point is 0, p2 there is 0 up to pm is 0. Of course, there can be no set of polynomials q1 up to qm, so that p1 q1 up to pm qm, they form 1, right? Because at the point z1 to zn, p1 is 0, so p1 q1 is 0, up to pm qm is 0, so the sum is 0, and 0 cannot be equal to 1. So one side of the theorem is actually pretty simple and straightforward to prove. It's the opposite direction that is not simple to prove, and it's the main point of the statement. So if there is no solution, you should prove there are polynomials q1 to qm, so that the linear combination, this combination p1 q1 up to pm qm would be equal to 1. So there are several different versions of Hilbert's Nullstellensatz theorem. In this lecture, we focused on one of them, often called the weak version, the algebraic weak version. In the following lectures, we would consider other versions, more complex analytic setting ones about holomorphic functions, etc. In the meantime, if you like to know more about this theorem and the proof of this theorem, an original proof of this theorem, you can find it as a blog post by Terence Tao. He has a blog called What's New. If you haven't seen that, take a look. There's a great post there which he presents a very, very direct proof to this theorem. Okay, I think it's a good place to stop until the next lecture.